The radio crackled with static, then nothing. Commander Jake Torres stared at the dead handset, his jaw tightening as the reality sank in. 12 hours ago, SEAL Team Bravo had been inserted deep into the Kandahar Mountains for what should have been a routine extraction mission. Now, somewhere in those jagged peaks, 8 of America's finest warriors were fighting for their lives with no way to call for help. The Taliban had learned. After years of cat-and-mouse games with coalition forces, they'd finally figured out how to jam military communications across entire valleys. The electronic warfare unit that had been tracking Team Bravo's movements had gone dark 3 hours before the ambush. No radio, no satellite uplink, no GPS beacon, just silence where there should have been voices. In the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram Airfield, tension hung thick as diesel exhaust. Officers hunched over glowing screens, their faces painted blue by radar displays showing nothing but empty mountains. Every few minutes, someone would try raising Team Bravo on a different frequency, only to be met with the same soul-crushing static. "Sir, we've got a problem," Lieutenant Morrison's voice cut through the oppressive quiet. "Weather's moving in fast. If we don't get eyes on them in the next 4 hours, we're looking at zero visibility for the next 72. Torres closed his eyes. 72 hours. In those mountains in winter, that might as well be a death sentence. The Taliban knew these peaks like their own backyards. They could wait. His men couldn't. "What assets do we have airborne?" Torres asked, though he already knew the answer would disappoint him. "Two Apache, but they're running low on fuel. The Predator drone lost signal an hour ago, probably the same jamming that's blocking our comms, and the AC-130 is grounded for maintenance." The room fell silent except for the persistent hum of electronics and the distant rumble of generators. 8 good men, maybe already dead, maybe dying, and the most powerful military in the world couldn't even find them. That's when she walked in. Captain Lydia Ghost. Novik moved through the operations center like smoke, her flight suit bearing the worn patches of countless missions. At 5'4", she barely came up to most of the men's shoulders, but something in her gray eyes made seasoned officers step aside. She'd been flying combat missions since before half these guys had even enlisted, yet somehow she remained invisible to the brass when promotion lists came around. "Ghost, you're not on the roster tonight," Torres said without looking up from his maps. "Heard you lost some sheep, Commander." Her voice carried a slight rasp from years of breathing recycled cockpit air. "Might know where to find them." For the first time in hours, Torres looked up. In Novik's steady gaze, he saw something that had been missing from his operations center all night: hope. The mission had started like so many others. Intelligence reports suggested a high-value target was hiding in a compound near the Pakistani border, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition convoys. SEAL Team Bravo drew the assignment: get in, capture or kill the target, get out. Simple, clean, routine. But the mountains had other plans. The insertion went perfectly. 2 Black Hawks had dropped the team at their designated landing zone under cover of darkness, using night vision goggles to navigate between peaks that scraped the belly of the aircraft. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Bull" Kowalski had led his 7 men across 3 miles of rocky terrain without incident, their thermal signatures invisible beneath specially designed ghillie suits. The compound sat in a narrow valley exactly where the satellite photos had shown it. But as Team Bravo moved into position, something felt wrong. The building was too quiet. No guards, no movement, no heat signatures on their thermal scopes. "Overwatch, this is Bravo 1, Kowalski had whispered into his radio. "Something's not right here. Compound appears abandoned." "Copy Bravo 1, proceed with caution." That was the last transmission anyone heard from them. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously. Taliban fighters had been waiting in caves carved into the valley walls, invisible to satellite surveillance and thermal imaging. They'd let the SEALs get close to the compound before opening fire with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. In the chaos that followed, Team Bravo had fought their way to higher ground, using the rocky terrain for cover. But the Taliban had numbers, local knowledge, and something new: military-grade jamming equipment that turned their radios into expensive paperweights. Now, 12 hours later, Tor stared at a map marked with their last known position, wondering if his men were still alive. "You mentioned knowing where to find them," he said to Ghost, who had pulled up a chair beside his desk. She nodded toward the map. "Bull Kowalski's got more lives than a cat, but he's also got more pride than sense. He won't retreat, not with civilians potentially in that compound." The compound was empty. According to satellite surveillance, yeah, but satellites don't see everything. Ghost tapped the map with her finger. "There's a cave system about half a click north of their last position. Local villages used to hide there during Soviet operations in the 80s. If I were Bull, that's where I'd make my stand." Tor studied her face. "And you know this how?" "Because I've been flying over these mountains for 6 years, Commander. While everyone else was looking at their fancy screens, I was looking out the window." Ghost had learned early in her career that being overlooked had advantages. While male pilots competed for the high-profile missions, the ones that made headlines and earned medals, she'd drawn the unglamorous assignments: flying supplies to remote outposts, providing overwatch for convoy escorts, reconnaissance flights over terrain so desolate that even the Taliban avoided it. But those flights had taught her something invaluable. The mountains had memory. Every cave, every ridgeline, every hidden path told a story to those patient enough to listen. She'd learned to read the landscape like a book, understanding how weather patterns created natural shelters, how ancient trade routes connected seemingly isolated valleys, how generations of warriors had used the same hiding places. "Even if you're right," Tor said, "we still can't reach them. The jamming." "Who said anything about radio?" Ghost's smile was thin but genuine. "You ever hear of a guy named Samuel Morse?" The idea was audacious, borderline insane, and probably their only hope. Morse code, the telegraph language that had connected the world before satellites and cell phones, relied on simple on-off signals that could cut through electronic interference like a knife through fog. While modern jamming equipment could scramble complex radio frequencies, it struggled with basic light patterns. Ghost's plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would fly her A-10 Thunderbolt II, callsign Warthog, over the suspected location of Team Bravo and use the aircraft's landing lights to transmit Morse code messages. If the SEALs were alive and watching the sky, they could signal back using infrared strobes visible only through night vision equipment. "It's crazy enough that it might work," Tors admitted, studying the weather reports. "But you'll be flying blind. No GPS guidance, no radio contact, no backup." "Wouldn't be the first time." Ghost was already heading for the door. Besides, the Warthog wasn't built for comfort missions. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was an ugly aircraft, all angles and armor plating wrapped around a massive 30mm cannon. Pilots called it the Warthog because of its ungainly appearance, but enemies called it something else entirely: death from above. Built around its GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a weapon so powerful that firing it actually slowed the aircraft down, the A-10 was designed for one purpose: killing tanks and supporting ground troops. Ghost had been flying Warthogs for 8 years, longer than almost any other pilot in theater. While her male counterparts transitioned to sleeker F-16s and F-22s, she'd requested to stay with the A-10. The brass assumed it was because she couldn't handle more sophisticated aircraft. They were wrong. She loved the Warthog because it was honest. No pretense, no flash, just brutal effectiveness. Like her. As she walked across the flight line toward her aircraft, Ghost ran through the mission parameters in her mind. The weather front was moving faster than predicted, maybe 3 hours before visibility dropped to 0. The terrain would be treacherous even in good conditions, with peaks reaching over 14,000 feet and wind patterns that could flip an aircraft upside down without warning. But somewhere in those mountains, 8 men were counting on her. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Riley Martinez, was already prepping the aircraft when she arrived. Martinez had been working on A-10s longer than Ghost had been flying them, and he knew her pre-flight routine by heart. "Heard you're going hunting, Captain," Martinez said, not looking up from his checklist. "Something like that." Ghost began her walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces and examining the aircraft's battle-worn exterior. This particular Warthog had been in theater for 3 years, and its aluminum skin bore the scars of dozens of combat missions. "You know," Martinez continued, "I've been thinking about those SEALs all day. My brother's infantry. I know what it's like to be out there with no comms." Ghost paused in her inspection. Martinez rarely talked about personal matters, but when he did, she listened. "They're good men," she said simply. "Yeah, they are, which is why they deserve someone who gives a damn flying cover for them." Martinez met her eyes. "Lucky for them, that's exactly what they're getting." The compliment caught Ghost off guard. In 6 years of flying combat missions, she could count on one hand the number of times anyone had acknowledged her dedication. She was the pilot they called when no one else was available, the one who flew the missions others avoided, the one whose name never appeared in commendation reports. "Thanks, Sergeant." "Don't thank me, Captain. Just bring our boys home." As Ghost climbed into the cockpit, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just another mission. This was 8 lives hanging in the balance, 8 families waiting for word, 8 futures depending on her ability to navigate impossible terrain in deteriorating weather using nothing but educated guesses and stubborn determination. She began her startup sequence, the Warthog's twin turbofan engines spooling up with their characteristic whine. In the glow of her instrument panel, Ghost looked like what she was, a warrior preparing for battle. The flight to the search area took 43 minutes, with Ghost navigating by landmarks and dead reckoning as GPS signals flickered in and out through the electronic interference. The mountains rose around her like sleeping giants, their peaks shrouded in clouds that grew thicker with each passing mile. At 12,000 feet, Ghost leveled off and began her search pattern. Below her, the landscape was a maze of ridges and valleys, any one of which could be hiding Team Bravo, or their bodies. She started with the area around the compound where the SEALs had been ambushed, flying slow figure-8 patterns while scanning the terrain through night vision goggles. The A-10's engines echoed off the valley walls, a sound that would carry for miles in the thin mountain air. If the SEALs were alive, they would hear her coming. Ghost activated her landing lights and began transmitting in Morse code. Bravo team, this is Ghost Actual if you copy signal with IR strobe." The message repeated every 30 seconds as she flew her search pattern, the A-10's powerful lights cutting through the darkness like a celestial telegraph. Dot dash dash dash, dot dash dot dot, dot dash, dot 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 dash dash. The rhythm of Morse code, unchanged since the 19th century, now carrying 21st century hope through Afghan skis. For 20 minutes, Ghost searched without response. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with clouds obscuring more and more of the terrain below. She had maybe an hour before conditions became too dangerous for flight. Then, on her 5th pass over a ridge 2 kilometers north of the compound, she saw it. A brief flash of infrared light, invisible to the naked eye but blazing like a beacon through her night vision equipment. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. SOS. Ghost's heart hammered against her ribs as she banked the A-10 toward the signal. There, another flash, this time longer and more complex. She grabbed her kneeboard and began copying down the pattern. Dash dot dash dash, dash 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 dot 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 dash 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 dot 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 dash. Hostile. The SEALs were alive, but they were in contact with enemy forces. Ghost circled the position, trying to get a visual on the terrain below. Through her night vision goggles, she could make out the dark mouth of a cave entrance carved into the mountainside. Muzzle flashes flickered like fireflies around its perimeter. Team Bravo was pinned down. Ghost keyed her radio, knowing the transmission would be nothing but static through the jamming, but needing to try anyway. Any station, this is Ghost Actual. I have visual on Bravo team. They are alive and in contact with hostile forces. Position is. She rattled off coordinates. Hopping someone somewhere was monitoring emergency frequencies. Below her, the infrared strobe flashed again. 8 packs all alive ammunition, low need immediate extract. 8 men all alive. Ghost felt relief flood through her, followed immediately by the crushing weight of responsibility. They were alive but trapped, and she was their only link to the outside world. She began transmitting back. Extraction inbound, hold position. It was a lie. She had no authority to call in an extraction, no way to communicate with base, no backup plan. But sometimes hope was more important than truth. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site well. The cave system sat at the bottom of a natural bowl, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover for attacking forces. There was only one way in or out, and the enemy controlled it. From her aerial vantage point, Ghost could see the tactical situation clearly. Team Bravo had taken refuge in the largest cave, using the entrance as a choke point to funnel attackers into their kill zone. But the Taliban weren't pressing their attack. They were content to wait, knowing that time and ammunition were on their side. Ghost tried to count enemy positions through her night vision system, but the heat signatures kept moving. At least 20 fighters, maybe more, positioned in a rough semicircle around the cave entrance. Every few minutes, one of them would fire a burst of automatic weapons into the cave mouth, more to keep the Americans pinned than to inflict casualties. It was a siege, and sieges favored the side with more men and supplies. Ghost circled higher, trying to stay above the effective range of small arms fire while maintaining visual contact with the battle below. The A-10's 30 cannon could make short work of enemy positions, but not without risking the lives of the men she'd come to save. The cave entrance was too close to enemy positions for precision strikes. She needed help, and she needed it soon. The weather front was almost on top of them now, with the first snowflakes beginning to impact her windscreen. In another hour, maybe less, visibility would drop to 0. That's when she spotted them, 2 sets of headlights winding their way up the mountain road toward the battle site. Taliban reinforcements, probably alerted by the sound of her engines. Ghost keyed her landing lights again. Enemy REINFORCMENTS approaching from south, 2 vehicles. The response came immediately. Copy Ghost, thanks for the warning. Then a pause, followed by a longer message. Ghost Actual, this is Bull KOWLSKI. We are running low on everything but fight. You are our angel. Bull Kowalski. Ghost had never met Team Bravo's leader face-to-face, but his reputation preceded him. 15 years in special operations, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. The kind of man who earned his men's loyalty through competence and courage rather than rank. She flashed back. Bull, this is Ghost, hang tight, working on solution. But what solution? Ghost was one aircraft with limited fuel and ammunition, facing an unknown number of enemy fighters in terrain that favored defenders. Even if she could somehow clear the Taliban positions around the cave, there was still the problem of extraction. No helicopter could land in that terrain, especially not in the approaching storm. The 2 Taliban vehicles had reached the battle site now, disgorging fighters who immediately took positions around the cave entrance. Ghost counted at least 15 additional men, all armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ghost made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed if anyone had been listening to her radio transmissions. She was going to engage enemy forces without authorization, in weather that was rapidly becoming unsurvivable, to buy time for a rescue that might never come. She rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive, lining up on the Taliban vehicles parked on the narrow mountain road. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was designed to destroy Soviet tanks. Unarmored trucks wouldn't even slow it down. Ghost to Bravo team. Danger close fire mission inbound. Keep your heads down. She squeezed the trigger, and the sky lit up with tracer rounds. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 3,900 per minute, each projectile capable of punching through tank armor. The two Taliban vehicles simply disintegrated under the assault, erupting in balls of flame that illuminated the mountainside for miles. Secondary explosions suggested the trucks had been carrying ammunition or fuel, or both. The blast wave rolled across the valley like thunder, echoing off the peaks and drowning out the sound of small arms fire. Ghost pulled out of her dive and climbed back to altitude, checking her instruments. The engagement had lasted less than 10 seconds, but she'd expended nearly 200 rounds of 30 ammunition. More importantly, she'd announced her presence to every Taliban fighter within 50 miles. From the cave entrance, an infrared strobe flashed. Ghost, you are magnificent. That bought us some time. But time for what? The destroyed vehicles had eliminated immediate reinforcements, but the fighters already in position around the cave were still there, still dangerous, still patient. And now they knew they were facing close air support. Ghost keyed her lights again. Bull, need to know your ammunition status. The response was not encouraging. Ghost, we have maybe 30 minutes of sustained fire left. After that we are down to harsh language. 30 minutes. Ghost checked her fuel gauge. She had maybe 90 minutes of flight time remaining, but that assumed she could find her way back to base in rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. If the storm hit as hard as predicted, she might not be able to land anywhere, let alone at Bagram. She was committed now. Whatever happened, she would stay with Team Bravo until the end. The Taliban fighters on the ground had reorganized quickly after the vehicle strike, taking cover behind rocky outcroppings and inside natural caves that honeycombed the mountainside. They were no longer content to wait out the siege. The arrival of coalition air support had changed the tactical equation. Ghost watched through her night vision system as groups of fighters began moving to flank the cave entrance. Bull Kowalski and his men would soon be taking fire from 3 directions instead of 1. She rolled into another attack run, this time targeting a cluster of heat signatures moving along a ridge about 200 meters east of the cave. The 13 cannon spoke again, stitching a line of destruction across the mountainside and sending several fighters tumbling into the darkness below. But as she pulled out of the dive, Ghost saw muzzle flashes from a different position. Someone was shooting at her. Tracer rounds streaked past her canopy, and she heard the distinctive crack of bullets passing close to the aircraft. The Taliban had brought along some heavier weapons. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past her left wing, close enough that she could feel the heat through the aircraft's skin. These weren't just small arms anymore. Someone down there had anti-aircraft weapons. Ghost jinked hard left, then right, spoiling the aim of anyone trying to track her flight path. The A-10 was built to absorb punishment, but even the Warthog had limits. A direct hit from an RPG could bring her down, turning her from an asset into another problem for Team Bravo to solve. She climbed back to higher altitude, trying to stay above the effective range of shoulder-fired weapons while maintaining visual contact with the battle below. It was a delicate balance, too high, and she couldn't provide effective close air support, too low, and she risked being shot down. The infrared strobe flashed again. Ghost, they are moving to flank US from the east. We need fires on grid. A series of numbers followed, map coordinates that would mean nothing without proper reference materials. Ghost cursed under her breath. Military grid coordinates were useless without knowing which map datum they referenced, and she had no way to communicate with base to get clarification. She would have to eyeball the target and hope she was hitting the right people. She could see the movement Bull was talking about, heat signatures creeping along the eastern ridgeline, using the terrain to mask their approach to the cave entrance. If they reached their destination, Team Bravo would be caught in a crossfire with no way out. Ghost lined up for another gun run, but as she rolled into her dive, something felt wrong. The A-10's controls seemed sluggish, and she could hear a rhythmic thumping sound over the roar of the engines. She'd been hit. A quick scan of her instruments showed hydraulic pressure dropping in the primary flight control system. Not catastrophic yet, but definitely not good. The Warthog was designed to fly with extensive battle damage, but there were limits to what even the toughest aircraft could endure. Ghost pushed the problem to the back of her mind and focused on the target below. The Taliban fighters on the ridge were almost in position to launch their flanking attack. She had one chance to stop them. The 30 cannon thundered again, sending a stream of depleted uranium death into the rocky outcropping where the enemy fighters had taken cover. Stone and metal fragments filled the air as the rounds impacted, and several heat signatures disappeared from her thermal display. But not all of them. As Ghost pulled out of her dive, she saw muzzle flashes from multiple positions along the ridge. The survivors of her attack were firing everything they had at the cave entrance, and Team Bravo was returning fire with decreasing intensity. They were running out of ammunition. Ghost checked her own weapon status. She'd expended over half her 30 rounds, and while she still had a full load of unguided rockets, using them so close to friendly forces would be like performing surgery with a sledgehammer. The hydraulic pressure warning light was flashing now, and the control stick felt increasingly heavy in her hands. She might have 10 minutes of flight time left, maybe less, before the aircraft became uncontrollable. 10 minutes to save 8 lives. Ghost keyed her landing lights one more time. Bull, this is Ghost. My aircraft is DAMAGD. I have limited time on station. The response came immediately. Ghost, understand you have given us more than we had any right to expect. If this is goodbye, it has been an honor. An honor. Ghost felt something tighten in her chest. In 6 years of combat flying, no one had ever called working with her an honor. She was the pilot they called when everyone else was busy, the one who flew the missions no one wanted, the one whose name never appeared in award citations. But to 8 men trapped in a cave, facing impossible odds, she wasn't just another pilot. She was hope with wings. Bull, this is not goodbye. I have one more card to play. Ghost had been thinking about the terrain around the cave system, studying it through her night vision equipment during the lulls between gun runs. The mountainside was steep but not vertical, covered with loose scree and rocky outcroppings that would provide handholds for someone desperate enough to try climbing. More importantly, there was a narrow ledge about 50 meters above the cave entrance, too small for a helicopter landing zone, but wide enough for something else entirely. Something crazy enough that it might work. Ghost pulled the A-10 into a climb, gaining altitude while she ran through emergency procedures in her mind. What she was contemplating had never been attempted in combat, at least not officially. But the Warthog was a forgiving aircraft, built by engineers who understood that sometimes pilots had to do impossible things. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. She would bring the damaged A-10 down in a controlled crash, landing on the narrow ledge above the cave, using the aircraft itself as a distraction while Team Bravo made their escape. The explosion would eliminate several Taliban positions and create enough chaos for the SEALs to break contact and move to a more defensible position. It was a one-way trip, but Ghost had made peace with that reality. She joined the Air Force to serve something bigger than herself. Tonight, that something had names and faces and families waiting for them to come home. She keyed her lights for what might be the last time. Bull, prepare for immediate extraction when you see the FIREWORKS move fast to grid. She rattled off coordinates for a ridge about a kilometer north of their current position. Hopping Bull would understand. The response was immediate and urgent. Ghost negative, do not understand, clarify your last. But Ghost was already committed to her final approach, the A-10's engines whining as she descended toward the mountainside. Through her night vision goggles, she could see the ledge rushing toward her, a strip of rock barely twice the length of her aircraft, bordered on one side by a cliff face and on the other by a 1,000-foot drop. At the last second, Ghost changed her mind. The Taliban fighters around the cave had heard her approaching and were repositioning to engage what they assumed would be another strafing run. But as Ghost flared the A-10 over the ledge, she realized she might have just enough control authority to pull off something even more audacious than a controlled crash. Instead of landing on the ledge, she flew just above it, close enough that her landing gear almost scraped the rock. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Taliban fighters scattered like startled insects as 20,000 pounds of military aircraft roared overhead at treetop level, engines screaming and cannon muzzle glowing red-hot from repeated firing. But the real genius of Ghost's maneuver wasn't the intimidation factor, it was the positioning. By flying the length of the ledge, she'd placed herself directly between the Taliban positions and the cave entrance, shielding Team Bravo from enemy fire for crucial seconds. Bull, Geo now, Geo now, Geo, she transmitted via landing lights as she pulled the A-10 into a steep climb. Through her night vision system, Ghost watched 8 figures emerge from the cave mouth and begin climbing the rocky slope toward higher ground. They moved with the practiced efficiency of special operations troops, covering each other's movement while maintaining fire discipline. The Taliban fighters, confused by Ghost's unexpected maneuver and blinded by the dust kicked up by her engines, were slow to react. By the time they reorganized their positions, Team Bravo was already halfway to the ridge line. But Ghost's aircraft was dying. The hydraulic system finally gave up completely, and the control stick went limp in her hands. She was flying on backup systems now, with minimal control authority and rapidly decreasing fuel. The A-10 wanted to nose over into a dive, and it was taking all her strength to keep the aircraft level. She had maybe 5 minutes before the situation became completely untenable. 5 minutes to get Team Bravo to safety and find somewhere to put down a crippled aircraft. The Taliban fighters had regrouped and were pursuing the SEALs up the mountainside, firing automatic weapons and launching the occasional RPG. Ghost could see the muzzle flashes through her thermal imaging system, but she no longer had the control authority to line up gun runs with any precision. She tried the radio one more time, broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Mayday, 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 this is Ghost Actual. I have battle damage and am losing control authority. Any station, SEAL Team Bravo is moving to extract that. She gave the grid coordinates, hoping someone was listening. Static answered her. Ghost watched Team Bravo reach the ridge line and begin setting up a defensive perimeter. They'd bought themselves some time and better terrain, but they were still outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Without immediate extraction, they would eventually be overrun. That's when Ghost saw them, lights in the distance, moving fast and low through the mountain valleys. Military aircraft flying in formation toward her position. The cavalry was coming. Ghost's radio crackled with the first clear transmission she'd heard all night. Ghost Actual, this is Hammer Flight. 2 Apache gunships inbound your position. We have you on thermal imaging and are tracking multiple hostile contacts around friendly forces. Request immediate sitrep. Relief flooded through Ghost as she keyed her landing lights. Hammer Flight, this is Ghost. I have 8 friendly packs on the ridgeline taking effective fire from at least 20 hostiles in the valley below. I am battle damaged and low on fuel. Request you take over close air support while I attempt emergency landing. Copy Ghost, we have visual on the friendlies. Commencing attack run on hostile positions. You are cleared to egress when ready. The 2 Apache helicopters swept down the valley like mechanical angels of death, their 30 chain guns chattering as they engaged Taliban positions. Hellfire missiles streaked from their stub wings, turning enemy strongpoints into craters. In less than 3 minutes, they had eliminated more targets than Ghost had managed in an hour of flying. But Ghost wasn't going anywhere. The A-10's backup flight control system was failing, and she was barely maintaining level flight. There was no way she could make it back to base, and the weather had deteriorated to the point where even finding a suitable emergency landing site would be nearly impossible. She'd saved Team Bravo, but she hadn't saved herself. Ghost Actual, this is Hammer Lead. We have the tactical situation under control. All hostile contacts have been neutralized and extraction birds are inbound. What's your status? Ghost looked at her instruments. Fuel was critical, hydraulics were gone, and the backup electrical system was showing signs of strain. The A-10 was flying more out of habit than aerodynamics at this point. Hammer Lead, I'm not going to make it back to base, looking for a place to set her down. Copy Ghost, we'll stay with you. There's a valley about 10 clicks north of here that might work, relatively flat terrain, no obstacles. 10 kilometers. In good weather, with a healthy aircraft, that would be an easy flight. In current conditions, with battle damage and failing systems, it might as well be on the moon. But Ghost had come too far to quit now. She nursed the crippled A-10 through the mountains, fighting to maintain altitude as the aircraft tried to enter an unrecoverable dive. The 2 Apache flanked her, their pilots providing constant updates on terrain and weather conditions ahead. Ghost, you've got about 5 minutes before that weather front hits your position. Visibility is going to drop to near zero. 5 minutes. Ghost checked her fuel gauge. She might have 3 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe 4 if she pushed the engines past their design limits. It was going to be close. The valley appeared ahead of her, a narrow strip of relatively flat ground between towering peaks. It wasn't much of a runway, maybe 1,000 meters of rocky terrain dotted with boulders and scrub brush, but it was her only option. Ghost lined up for her final approach, the A-10's engines struggling to maintain power as fuel pressure dropped. She had one chance to get this right. Too steep and she'd hit the ground like a meteor, too shallow and she'd never reach the valley floor. Ghost, you're coming in fast, recommend you. The radio went dead as the aircraft's electrical system finally gave up. Ghost was alone now, flying by instinct and experience, with nothing but the feel of the aircraft to guide her down. The ground rushed up to meet her. At the last second, Ghost pulled back on the stick, flaring the A-10 for landing. The aircraft touched down hard, bounced once, then settled onto the rocky ground with a grinding screech of metal on stone. She was down, alive, and for the first time in 6 years she'd made a difference that people would remember. As Ghost sat in her silent cockpit, surrounded by the debris of her aircraft, she thought about the 8 men she'd helped save. They would go home to their families, tell their stories, maybe even remember the pilot who'd stayed with them when everyone else had given up. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself. She wasn't just the pilot they called when no one else was available. She was a warrior who'd faced impossible odds and found a way to win. The storm hit 20 minutes later, bringing with it zero visibility and winds that would have made flying suicidal. But by then, it didn't matter. SEAL Team Bravo was safe, extracted by helicopters that had found them thanks to Ghost's Morse code transmissions. The Taliban fighters were dead or scattered, their ambush turned into a disaster by superior firepower and tactics. And Ghost, she sat in her wrecked aircraft, waiting for rescue, knowing that she'd finally earned something that had eluded her throughout her career: respect. The rescue helicopters found her 3 hours after dawn, guided by the smoke rising from her crashed A-10. She was hypothermic and dehydrated, but alive and uninjured. As the pararescue team loaded her onto a stretcher, Ghost looked back at the twisted remains of her aircraft. The Warthog had been her home for 8 years, her weapon and her shield. Now it was just scrap metal scattered across an Afghan mountainside. But somehow, that seemed fitting. The A-10 had given its life to save 8 others, and Ghost couldn't think of a more honorable end for any warrior. At the field hospital in Bagram, Ghost learned that her actions had not gone unnoticed. The Morse code transmissions had been picked up by multiple listening posts, providing commanders with a real-time account of the rescue operation. More importantly, Team Bravo's Deb,